Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on my YouTube channel. My name's Jade and I'm going to be showing you how to color a commission that I've been working on of a daughter and her poodle using COPIC markers and Pigma Micron pens on Fabriano Bristol plus paper. I would highly recommend all of these materials. I've sped up the video to about 500% until you get near the end, and then it's kind of 300% sped up. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I'm coloring it, what techniques I'm using, etc. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send me a message either here on YouTube, leave them in the comment section below, or hit me up at jade@bentostudios.com or on my Facebook page at Bento Studios. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the video. So as you can see, I've already got the poodle kind of in, and I'm using purples. The poodle should be black, but I don't want to have a big blob of black on the paper because it doesn't give a lot of depth without doing pointillism. And I'll do a different video on pointillism later, and I'll link to it in the comments. So if I already have it up, it's linked to you in the comments. If not, please hold tight. That takes kind of a while. So what I'm doing is I'm adding a lot of definition around where the curly ears are because it's kind of poofy. So what I'm using is the darker purple marker that you see on the side of the screen right now, and I'm using kind of squiggly lines to make it look kind of poofy. So these are all just done with purples, and then in a second I'm going to be going back over it with Prussian blue, which is just started now. So Prussian blue to give it just a little bit extra depth, and then continuing to blend with some of the lighter colors for the dog. The skin is done in E00, and I started actually using a brick beige to do some of the shadows because I wanted her to have a darker skin tone. That was a bad idea. It made her look kind of dirty. So I went back and changed it to an I think it's E02, which is a fruit pink. That seems to work really well. It makes it look a little orangey before you get any other colors onto the paper. So, yeah, it just looks really orange and really bright until you start putting more color down. But the skin, I wanted to make sure that I nailed it, and if I messed it up like with the poodle, I wanted to make sure that I did that first so that if I had to start completely over, I didn't, one, waste a lot of time, and two, waste a lot of other materials if I was just going to botch, you know, the dog. One thing that I want to talk about is the different types of strokes and different types of blending that you can do with COPIC markers. COPIC comes, what I'm using right now on the video is the brush tip, and on the other side you'll see me use that a little bit more when I get to shading the hair. What bit of the hair you get to see getting shaded has what's called a marker tip that's a little bit fatter. It might be what you're used to seeing like with a Crayola type or just like a regular, you know, Sharpie marker. It's good for blending, but it's not as good as the brush tip. The brush tip gives you kind of that watercolor-ish, painted kind of feel. It also lets you blend the marker together a little bit better, and it takes full advantage of the alcohol base that COPIC has in it so that it blends very nicely. Right now, while I'm coloring the skin tones, I'm really focusing on getting a really good even layer of the E00, which is the base skin tone that I use for kind of normal skin to darker skin. With darker skin, it is the lighter highlighted color, more so than it is, you know, just the medium tone that I like to use. The medium tone of this piece will end up being the fruit pink. So I'm concentrating on shading that. And what I do with the skin is I like to have a bit of a mix of the wet and the dry shading of COPIC marker. Now this is something that's unique to COPIC. Other marker sets that I have used do not blend as well as COPIC does. Now I understand that Prismacolors are coming out with brush tips also. I've heard that they have blend. I'm going to do a video on different types of markers and kind of the pros and cons of those, so I won't get into that a lot today. But basically COPIC, if you apply a color immediately on top of another color while it's still kind of damp, it feels a little tacky and damp and cool to the touch. It will blend to it. So the E02 that I'm using, the fruit pink, and the E00 that I'm using are kind of being blended together here. So that's why you see me switching back and forth between the two markers a whole lot instead of just, you know, coloring all of the E00 at once and all of the E02 at once, because I want to have that softer look. Now if you want like a crisp kind of superhero kind of look, you might opt to go with that thicker marker end, and you might wait for the E00 to dry, allow it about 1 to 2 minutes to do that, and then go back over it where you want these crisper shadows, so that you can kind of get more contrast and a sharper edge on your shadows. So that's kind of what I'm doing right here. I use the very tip of the brush when I want to get in some very fine detail work, but otherwise I predominantly use the flat edge of the brush to just get some very broad strokes. you'll see that I'm now going over it with an E0, or I'm sorry, just a 0, which is colorless blender. This one allows me to lighten up some of those skin tones. So I'm just kind of adding a little bit more contrast, and right now I don't want to go any further with the skin tones. I might darken it up a little bit, but for the most part I want to leave it there until I'm ready to color it in darker. So you see me adding the yellow, and it's about to cut out right here and go to the full hair almost being done. The yellow that I'm adding is so that I can have a bit of a sheen, and you can see I've already added the brick beige and the sand on top of the yellow, and you can still see that kind of glow underneath it. The person that I'm drawing has brown hair, but it's very reflective and very shimmery. She's young, so I want her hair to look very glossy, but not oily. So one of the ways that I'm accomplishing this is by adding yellow to the hair, but I'm doing it before I add all of these other colors in. With Copic, if you're adding more than 3 colors, it will usually look blotchy unless you're going over it with a substantially darker color. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, is I'm adding in some of the darker elements with a lot of mind to where the yellow is, keeping that as the highlighted color, and periodically I put some of the brick beige back over the top of the yellow and allow it to have kind of that softer blending, so that I don't lose the sheen, but it's also not popping out at you like, hey, I'm yellow, I'm in your face. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm adding darker browns to it. One of the colors that I like to use is a copper. It has a little bit of a reddish brown to it, but it's not overly red. I find that it has a very nice natural kind of hair color. That combined with the burnt umber, which is a very dark brown, I think that's what I'm adding now, really gives kind of more of a striking appearance and a nice contrast to the sand, which would be essentially the mid-tone of this, the sand, and I think I used dark suntan as another one of the colors predominantly in the hair. The hair, when it comes out from the head, it should be noted that it's darker, and then as the light hits it, it gets lighter, obviously, and keeping a few strands kind of around the neck and around, the front of the face softens it up a little bit. So if you want to go for a more feminine look, that's definitely one of the best ways to achieve it. Keeping the hair in shadow as it's underneath other strands of hair and, behind the person is going to give it the more depth, and it's going to make the hair look fuller. One of the common mistakes that I used to make was I used to start coloring the hair and I used to get very discouraged because it would take me a lot of time to make the hair look like hair, and until it starts to look like hair, it looks very stringy, especially if you're working in like pencil or ink, and it looks almost like the person is balding or they have some kind of hair loss problem, or it's just like their hair's fallen out or something. It just looks really stringy and thin and not very attractive. So it takes a lot of time to do the hair for me, and that's something that I had to kind of come to terms with, and over time I became more comfortable with it, and now I just kind of have the understanding that I'm going to spend, when I have nice hair like this in a piece that needs to be shaded, a little bit wavy, has a lot of layers to it, and curves and tendrils, I know that it's going to take me a little bit longer. So just having that understanding going into doing hair, I found helps me as long as I have my mindset kind of prepared. So now I'm working on the dress. The dress is done in some lighter blues, and I'm using this dark blue for kind of some contrast. The dress is kind of a satiny, it's a prom dress. So I wanted to make it look very sheen. I wanted it to be kind of glossy, but I didn't want it to be as shimmery as her hair or the necklace that I'm about to color. The dress was blue, so I had to do some color matching on that, and I also wanted it to look very alive and very soft, so that's why you see there's a lot of line work and a lot of contrast. The first thing that I started shading was I just shaded where I knew I wanted the highlights to go. I added in some of the mid-tones on the top part of her dress, and then I went with the heaviest piece to the middle tones on the bottom of the dress. So again, this is all about the shadows and keeping it looking sheen, which means keeping some pieces looking brighter than others and adding in the midtones, and then repeatedly going back over it with the lighter and the mid-tone blue colors that I used, which again are on the side of the video so you can see which colors I'm using. I really like process blue, it's one of my favorite colors. Now I'm working on the dog's scarf. I had originally wanted to do kind of a pink polka dotted look, but then I changed my mind. I decided I had a lot of blue on the page, and I also had purple on the dog, so I knew an orange and yellow contrast would really bring out the scarf a little bit more and just kind of pop on the page. So I'm kind of going back over that now. I'm adding in the red for some depth, and I'm coloring it back in with the orange. I went a little crazy with the orange, and I ended up having to lighten it up with some more yellow and the colorless blender. The trick to doing good scarves and clothes are making sure that you have the creases and the depth really accentuated with the darker colors, and that the highlights are actually highlights. Whenever a dark touches a light, you have usually a black line or just a very dark line, and when two darks meet, you have a light line. So keeping the light next to the dark and the light in between the two darks really provides a lot more contrast, and it lets the clothes look like they're a little bit more alive, they have more body, they're stiff where they need to be stiff, just that kind of stuff. So it's just a lot of attention to that. And here's where I'm lightening up the scarf a little bit using the colorless blender. The nose, I didn't have to pay a lot of attention to it. I just used that Prussian blue again, and I was just really careful. You can't really see it very well in the video, but I was careful and very cognizant of where the nostrils were, and I left a lot of highlights in so that you could see where the nose curled up. But that was pretty much all the detail I wanted to put into the nose. And now I'm doing the necklace. That is, I did a goldish tinted necklace instead of the silvery diamond that she had, but I just made it a little bit sheen so that it still looked like it had diamonds. I'm doing that by using a couple of different lighter colors, like the BG10, which is really nice, and then the BV00, which is a lot softer. To add more contrast to the blue dress, I'm now adding purple. It's the amethyst color. I like this color a lot. I'm actually going to have to replace this marker after finishing this piece. Adding a little bit of purple to blue gives a lot of depth. You can add purple to a lot of colors and it'll give it really nice depth. I personally don't like to add it to skin tones because I think it makes them look a little dirty. And then going back over with this prune and the amethyst to get some of the ornate detailing on the top part of the dress also. I use brown to shade in gold whenever I want to add a shadow to a gold piece of jewelry. I just find that it kind of gives it a little bit more depth, and whereas if I use an orange, it looks kind of like dingy for some reason. So unless I'm, you know, having a really, really bright piece, if I just want it to have soft shadow, I just use a brown. I'm coloring the lips, and the top lip is always darker than the bottom lip. And one thing I was showing you there really fast was my markers are actually trying to bleed. Some of the Copic markers, they just want to drip and drip and drip, so I have to keep blotting this one marker over and over and over to keep it from bleeding onto the paper. One way you can tell if it's doing that is if you look at the brush tip and it looks like it's sopping wet, and you'll kind of see like it almost has a like a droplet on it. That's a good sign that you need to blot that pen down. Adding a little bit of pink eyeshadow to her, just to the top of the eyelids, not going up toward the eyebrow, just to kind of accentuate the eyes. Especially because she was getting ready for prom. This is a prom picture commission. I wanted to make sure that, you know, she looked like she was kind of dolled up. So it's not a natural eyeshadow at all by any means. I'm adding R02, which is flesh color, now to her skin. Now that I have more of these browns and these blues in, you notice that the skin tone kind of looked paled out, and before it looked really, you know, striking, especially compared to the white background and the purple dog. So I'm going back and I'm adding in a lot of these flesh colors, and I'm shading in her nose. Even if you have light coming from one side of the face that would be heavier on one side than the other, there's still a bit of shadow before you get to the bridge of the nose. So I wanted to add that in and make sure I gave that some definition as well. So I'm just kind of fixing up all of that stuff, making sure that the picture overall is balanced, and paying a lot of attention to where the lighting is. Shading in underneath the hair is also really important. It makes the hair look like it's a part of the head instead of just like sitting there hovering in the air. So adding a little bit of shadow, not a whole lot, underneath the hairline is really good. Sorry the video skipped. This is from a different day after I double checked her eye color. That's something I always do whenever I work on commissions, is double check the eye color, especially after botching one this year. First commission I ever botched. Her eyes are brown, so what I'm doing is I'm dabbing in a little bit of different color browns, and I'm not going to go all the way down to the bottom of her eyeball. It's probably very hard to see on this screen unless I were to zoom in. I'm not sure that my phone could handle that. So I'm just kind of dabbing it in, starting darker and then working lighter down. And for the most part, this is just doing really soft pointillism because her eyes are very small on the page. If I try to put a lot of detail in here, I'm probably going to end up bleeding over into the white of her eyes, and that wouldn't be very good because then I have to thicken the black and we're going to lose some of that softer look that she has. So keeping it just kind of light and kind of abstract in her eyes is the best way to go when it's this small. Sometimes when the eyes are bigger, I'll add just a little fleck of green or a little fleck of blue to brown eyes to just give them a little bit more reflection. And also if her eyes were a little bit bigger, I would have added some gray to the eyeballs. So here I'm tying up my green, a light green that I have, with some lace because I'm going to do some pointillism work. And I don't actually want to do pointillism, I just want it to be very abstract. So I've wrapped the lace around the tip and I've taped it up with artist tape. And you can see the green a little bit through. And what you want to do is you want to blot it on a piece of paper beforehand to make sure that the thickness is right. And you'll see that some of those are too thick, some of them are too light, so I'm getting an idea of what I want to do and how I want to handle it. You'll see that my grip loosens up quite a bit. I'm holding the pen in a slightly different way, as if I might hold charcoal or maybe a brush versus holding a pen or a marker. What I'm doing is I'm making kind of some liney patterns that kind of swirl around, similar to what I did on her dress, to keep the kind of ornate look, but I want it to look really soft, so that's why I'm using a softer green. I'm not going crazy with it either, and I'm not pressing down very hard. If the brush starts to seep through the lace too much, I kind of rotate the pen a little bit and get my bearings a little bit by making some dabs on the edge of the paper, make sure that it still looks the way I want it to. You can also do this with gauze, you can do it with cotton, you can try coloring cotton and blotting it onto the paper. Each of it will give you kind of a different look. I like winding up the lace because I've got a mess of lace sitting around the house and I figured I may as well use it for something purposeful. And since she's kind of a girly girl, having a lacy kind of delicate look does work pretty well for the piece. It's a bit old school also because I could probably do this with like a green pen or something, but I just don't think it would be as cool. So I'm showing you the difference, like how flexible it is, because you can blot these in with ink and you see how stiffer that is. That one is stiff because I used ink on it to blot it, and what it happens is it gets really thick and really difficult to bend. So depending on how frequently you use this same piece of lace over and over, it may start to thicken up and you're not going to be able to use it anymore. If you're using lace with like ink, I'd recommend not using the same one for your marker work, and preferably trying to clean it before you use it again. That way you don't have as much of a problem with extra bleed or little flakes of ink or something getting on your piece. I used a BV00 to just kind of accentuate some of these little curls, and now it's time to just do some finish work on the background. I'm going to use the lace again, but in a slightly different capacity. I'm practicing right now just kind of coloring over the lace and getting an idea of how I want to do this, so I'm just going to firmly extend the lace, hold it really taut, and I'm just very lightly, and you can't tell that from the video, but I'm very lightly brushing the marker over the top of the lace to get kind of a latticey type look. And I'm just doing it here and there because I don't want to have literal stripes going down the page. Again, this is just to add somewhat of a background and to make it look just a little bit softer. I'm coloring on the lace a little bit now just to put a little bit of the pattern up in the top right. It's not much. I didn't really like it, so I didn't continue with it. It works much better with ink, and I'm sure if I had colored ink or like acrylic, it would have gone over really well, and I probably could have had a nice lacy pattern up there. But the more detail that I put in the background, the more it's going to distract from the portrait. Portrait backgrounds don't need to be extremely detailed. Now I'm going over it with the colorless blender. I'm just softening up some of the pinks that I added, because sometimes when you brush over that, you know, the brush gets a little hard, the brush tip, so and it makes some harder marks, so I just wanted to soften it up, make it kind of hazy. Again, adding more depth to the eyes, And I'm going to be using the Pigma Micron pen 005 and 03 to add some depth to the eyes and a few other parts of her body. And Pigma Micron pens are archival quality. They're great for making lines. They don't last incredibly long, but I have been pretty happy with the sets that I bought. They seem very durable. They last me quite a long time. I don't use like one marker a piece or anything. I do tend to abuse my brush markers though. My brush Pigma Micron pens, when I make butterflies or trees, I like to really grate them against the page. So I'm just kind of darkening up various aspects of the piece and making it look a little bit bolder. Sometimes when I do like comic book style or anime style art, I'll use a graphic 1. That's not to be confused with the 01. The 01 still has the pen tip. The graphic 1 has a marker tip, and that'll give you a really solid bold line as opposed to the delicate lines that you can get with the 01. So sometimes I'll use that to get a really striking, thick, bold line, and if you look at some of the pieces I've done, you can definitely tell which ones have those types of markers, namely the Lena Inverse piece I did and like the Ruby piece. Those all have a very heavy marker contrast to the color. I'm fixing kind of the ear right now because I didn't have a lot of detail on the ear and I really should have, so I was just going back over that and making sure that all the shadows. This is also a good time to clean up any marker flaws. Sometimes the Copic will bleed or you may just have a stray mark. So this is a good opportunity to just check all of the edges and the lines and really bring out any additional depth that you may have missed or any errors that you don't want your viewer to see. And in a second here I'm going to realize that I have some white space in between the dog and her, and I'm going to end up closing that up with some browns and her skin tone. I should be realizing it in a second, right? So again, just adding more depth to different things. I was pointing something out there. I think it was bleed, the bleed mark, and closing up any of the gaps. So what I'm doing is I'm adding in her darkest skin layer because this should all be in shadow. So I added that in, and now I'm going to use the darkest brown to just kind of, create the illusion of some hair back behind her until I'm satisfied. This is all about what's called negative space. So it's just filling up these empty holes that would have otherwise been distracting, and just kind of alluding to some things being there. And again, just firming up like the eyes, adding in anything else that may have been missing. And I was going to sign it with the 003, and then I realized that I need to cut the page down. So now I'm going to carefully remove my artist tape, and I do this very slowly by holding that firmly and peeling the artist tape all the way back. You can tell that it doesn't give a clean line from the marker, and that actually started to tear the ink up. So what I did was I tore it off right immediately, and then I continued on with the pull. And now it's ready to be cut, and it's finished. That's it. Thank you guys for joining me, and you can see some of the color that seeps around the back. You can see all the bleed. Thank you guys for joining me. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. You can message me here on YouTube, or you can message me on my Facebook at Bento Studios, or send me an email at jade@bentostudios.com. Thank you guys so much for joining. As I add other videos, you can see them in the bottom below. I am available for commissions, so if there's anything that you want drawn, just send it to me, and I'll be glad to work on it for you. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. Bye.